Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
The other bit of magic that they have going on is sort of makes some of that a little less relevant, especially if you're somebody that's going to use Publisher a lot. The Publisher application has what's called personas. When you tap the persona icon, it lets you choose designer and photo. So you can select it in Publisher and then tap the persona icon, switch over to designer, and edit it as though you had moved over to the designer app. Sort of Publisher becomes designer as needed and has all of the features that are in designer.
Welcome back to another episode of iPad Pros. We're joined today by Denny from BeardyGuyCreative.com to dive into all of the Affinity 2.0 apps. Serif, the makers of Affinity Designer, Photo, and Publisher, have announced version 2 is now out for all of their platforms, including iPad, Mac, and Windows. And best of all, there's a universal license you can buy once, use everywhere, and they're really awesome apps. And along with this announcement, we got Publisher on the iPad. This is page layout. This is a brand new tool that's not really been on the iPad before Publisher. So this is a really exciting moment for iPad to have this new workflow open up for us iPad users. So to dive into all these announcements is Denny, who was on episode 30 of this podcast when we initially got the Affinity apps for iPad. This was back in August of 2018 when we started to dive into the original Affinity Photo and Designer for iPad. So check out episode 30 if you haven't heard that one. But I'm very excited to dive into all the Affinity updates with today's episode. As a reminder, you can support this podcast over at patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. Every single dollar goes a really, really long way and is greatly, greatly appreciated. So thank you so much if you have in the past or currently support the show. It is greatly appreciated. And with that, here's my discussion with Denny all about Affinity version 2.0. Enjoy. Welcome back to the podcast, Denny.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. So when you were last on, it was August of 2018. So it's been a good 4 years.
Yeah. Lots happened.
It has. And I'm trying to remember back. I believe when you were on last, that's kind of when Designer came out for iPad. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. So we are coming back together once again with major Affinity news and discussion today, as version 2 of all their apps have been released across Windows, Mac, and iPad.
Yeah. Yep. Very exciting.
So before we dive into all that, can you, for those that haven't listened to episode 30, and I'd encourage you to go back and listen to that one. It's a good one. But can you kind of introduce, your background and what your role, what the iPad's role in your life is and all that?
Sure. Yeah, I transitioned to the iPad back around 2016 and 17 is when I really just sort of gradually stopped using my Mac laptop. And after a while, I realized I wasn't using it at all. And so I sold it to a family member. But it was, it became my primary computer. I do website development and management through the iPad, and using my primary app there is Textastic, which has a built-in FTP server
for web development.
I do it all by hand. I've kind of been doing it for a long time, so I'm old school that way. I don't do any of the new stuff really. And most of my clients are small nonprofits and small businesses, so the hand coding everything has worked really well, and the iPad has been great for that. And then along with that work, of course, you've got graphic work that comes with that. And so my graphic design work sort of started with website needs. And over time, that transitioned to doing print stuff, brochures, newsletters, annual reports, basically anything and everything. And that also began to transition for me to the iPad. As I moved over, I was finding apps at the time. There were, I forget now what the apps were, the early apps that I used. But Designer came on board pretty quickly in that time period. And that's what Designer and Photo are the two apps from Affinity that I really used. They were my primary iPad workhorses, and they had been on the Mac, so I was familiar with the Mac versions. It was a very easy transition to the iPad versions of those apps.
Excellent. Yeah. Very cool. And what's your current setup these days?
I went ahead and got the M1 iPad. I had someone in the family that wanted my 2018 iPad, so I went ahead and updated. Probably didn't need to, but I was glad that I did when they announced Stage Manager. So that's my iPad, and I've got a Magic Keyboard. Though I've actually found lately that I've been really happy using Moft. Has a case, and they have a series of different accessories for the iPad that go kind of work with the case. And one of those is like a stand that attaches magnetically, and that has been really, probably of all the accessories I've used for the iPad, that's been my favorite of various stands and various cases, because the case is thin enough that you can pop it onto your Magic Keyboard, and it will continue working with that.
Really?
And yeah, and it's fairly strong there.
It won't close, though, I'd imagine, right?
Well, it does.
Okay.
And that's actually, I'm using the original Magic Keyboard that's, not just a smidge thin, it's not adjusted for the M1.
Right.
But it's been fine, even with that little thin case on there. It probably stretches it a little bit, but it hasn't caused any issues. And then they have this magnetic stand that has been really nice for using it in tablet mode, which I find I'm actually using it in tablet mode a lot more because of this stand. It allows me to configure it in all sorts of different arrangements. When I'm lounging around on the couch, I can pop it on my lap on a pillow, and I can flip it. It does these different angles where you can flip it around and you can hold it. It's like a nice handle. So I'm actually finding I'm using it a lot more without a keyboard, which is unusual for me. I've always kept my iPad in the keyboard, or most of the time. And it comes into play a little bit with these Affinity apps as well, because it's interesting now that I've gotten in the habit of using the iPad without a keyboard and the Magic Trackpad. I'm doing more by hand, and it works pretty well with the Affinity stuff.
Very cool. Yeah, and the Apple Pencil, is that something you use much of?
Yeah, I have the pencil, and I'm using that more as well. I think because I'm using the iPad in tablet mode more often. It's funny how just one accessory can change the way you use something, but it's really had an impact. The stand has, but so the Apple Pencil is something I use. And I use it. I tend to use it with certain apps more than other apps. There are times when I may go days when I don't touch it. But then if I have something, if I get a project that requires one of the Affinity apps, I'm much more likely to use that.
Yeah. Cool.
So
anything else before we dive into Affinity?
That probably covers it.
Okay. So Affinity, for those that aren't up to what they do, they've had Photo for the longest time. That was the original app, and it's a Photoshop replacement. Then they released Designer, which is in what's the Adobe counterpart to that one?
Illustrator?
Yep, Illustrator. And then they had Publisher on the Mac for the longest time here, many years, and that's kind of the InDesign replacement.
Right.
And we've been waiting for Publisher to come to iPad, and it finally has with version 2. And this is the one I've been most eager to see come over, because page layout is something, which is what InDesign does and Publisher does, is something that I do a fair bit of just in everyday, I want to say life, but yeah, it's the most, that's the thing that I was most eager to see brought over.
Yeah, I was super excited to have it. That was the only thing I was going back to my Mac for was Affinity Publisher. And I had previously, in the past, I used Apple Pages quite a bit. Is you can do so much with Pages. It has some limitations, but I really got proficient at using it to its maximum. But it's not as powerful as InDesign or Publisher, and so it's really been nice. Just I expect I've only used Publisher for a day, but I imported some of my previous projects from my Mac, and it's going to be really nice to be able to do it all.
Yeah,
do it all there.
And the launch that's going on now, it's 40% off everything, and it's interesting. So these are brand new apps. If you have Photo version 1 or Designer version 1 on iPad, you'll have to download these as new SKUs. Your old apps will continue to work. But they have kind of a new model here where you can purchase them outright on the App Store for currently $12 each. It'll end up being $20 when the introduction is done. So $36 for all three of these. Or if you are someone that does want to use the desktop components, either Windows or Mac, you can purchase right now for $99 a universal license. So on the iPad, what that looks like is you're logging into your Affinity account to unlocking these, which is really cool that that's actually a thing. I guess the reason Apple lets this happen is you can buy the $99 license through in-app purchase as well. So
yeah, I think it all seems to be going through in-app purchase, and my purchase yesterday was flawless. Like I just tapped Universal, and it just was there was no waiting, no problem at all. You can also just through their website buy the Universal license as well there. Oh, okay, nice.
And it's marked down from $170. So and the whole account thing's interesting because they also have, if you notice on their website, this add-ons area. And now that there's they've had accounts before, but it seems like the accounts are more of a thing now. You can purchase these add-ons on the Infinity's website for brushes and other things that are worked across all your Affinity apps.
Yeah, they have a whole marketplace that's been developing for several years now, and there's a lot to choose from. Yeah, yep, and they work. Most, if not everything, I think works across all the different apps. So the brushes work across, Publisher, Designer, Photo, textures, all of it. So that's super nice.
Yeah, and something I guess curious about the apps is they do kind of play very nicely together. Like you can start one place, move stuff into the other. Can you speak a bit about the that whole process? Like if I need to do some photo touching and then bring that into Publisher, what's that process like?
Yeah, it is really what they have done. I think is sort of magical. So you could start, let's say, on your Mac with an Affinity file, and then open that Affinity file up on your iPad, or in the Affinity app on the iPad, or you can open that file up in Publisher on the iPad. Or you can start a Publisher file on your iPad and then later on open it up on the Mac.
So it's a single file format across all three apps.
Yes, all three apps will see the files as compatible. So they have a different, I believe they all have their own abbreviation, their own file name type. But the apps open them all interchangeably, and there's no conversion or anything like that. They see the different files as basically being the same. And so you can move between Mac, Windows, and iPad seamlessly between the different apps. And then the other bit of magic that they have going on is sort of makes some of that a little less relevant, especially if you're somebody that's going to use Publisher a lot. The Publisher application has what's called personas. Well, the other apps have personas too, but they function slightly differently. With Publisher, the persona lets you move between. You stay in the Publisher app, but when you tap the persona icon, it lets you choose Designer and Photo. So if you have chosen let's say you have imported some sort of designer file into your project. It might be a graphic of some sort. You can select it in Publisher and then tap the persona icon, switch over to designer, and edit it as though you had moved over to the designer app. Sort of Publisher becomes designer as needed and has all of the features that are in designer.
So all the tool panels, those swap out?
Yeah, they swap out to match what you would see if you had actually switched to the designer app. So then you can work in that file, making all the changes you need to make, and then when you're done, there's no saving or no anything. You basically just tap back to the icon for personas and you switch back to Publisher and you're there, and you basically didn't have to do anything other than that tap to switch over and tap to switch back. And the same thing applies for the photo application. You can hop over and let's say you've imported a raw file or some other, just a JPEG or whatever that you need to make some modifications to, or maybe it was a more complicated, maybe not just a picture, but maybe it was a graphical type design where you used, let's say, a mesh. And you just hop over to Photo and go in and make the changes, and then hop back to Publisher, and it's there waiting for you.
By hop over, are you talking about the persona again, or the actual app?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, you hop over via the persona.
Yeah.
So you're not switching apps, and it's really, now you do have to, in order for that to work, you do have to purchase all the apps.
Okay,
it
so
won't
this
work.
is based on the account thing. So you log
Yeah.
so you create a free account after you purchase these on the App Store, and it kind of links all these under your ID for Affinity. So once you do that, you have the ability to do these personas. It's not just like buy one and get all three for free.
Right. Yeah, you have to purchase, in order to use the different personas, you have to purchase Publisher, Photos, and Designer on the iPad. To use all those apps in the iPad. And if you want to do the same thing, if you make the universal purchase, then by default that universal purchase lets you download and use the Mac apps too. So if you've downloaded those and you want to hop over and do some work on a Mac, then same thing applies. As long as you have the applications installed, it lets you hop between the personas. There must be there must be something within the apps where it's not opening the other apps, but it's using the framework there.
Yeah, because the UI is very similar across all three, I must say. It's different tool sets, of course, but it feels like it's one language you're learning.
Yeah, there's a lot of crossover. So like a lot of what you're doing in Publisher, you can just edit right in Publisher. So if you've got a designer file in Publisher, you can hop into it and make changes right in Publisher without switching to the designer persona. If, depending on what you need to do. If there are some features in Designer and some features in Photo that are specific to those apps that aren't all included in Publisher. But
like HDR stacking probably isn't a thing you can do within Publisher.
Right. Yeah, right. The Publisher has a subset of those tools, and it's got like the most commonly used tools built right in. But yeah, so some of the specialty stuff you then need to hop over to via the persona to the more specific tool set.
And if you're gearing a project to be the final output as a Publisher page layout thing, you should probably start there. And like with the photo, if you're aiming to have a photo, finalized, you should probably start in Photo. Is that kind of the mindset of where to start each file?
Yeah, I mean, that's the way I do it. If I know I'm going to be doing a multi-page document, like say a newsletter or an annual report that's going to be 2, 3, 4 pages or more, then I'm going to start with Publisher. And more than likely, that's going to let me do almost everything I need to do. If I'm doing specific things that, if I'm editing a photo, then I'm going to start with Photo. And if I'm focusing on creating maybe a single page flyer or poster, then I'll start with Designer. And that tool set is likely to cover me for almost everything I need, for that kind of document. And if something changes, that I need to hop over to one of the different apps, then I can do that, and I can open it up or import it into Publisher or whatever. But yeah, so you kind kind of know what you're doing beforehand. And just what's great is you know that if you need to transition to one of the other apps, you can.
Excellent. And do they do any kind of file storage things? Like if I'm working on the Windows version for whatever reason, how do I get those files over there easily?
What you would do is basically, like when I'm on my iPad, I can easily, now I don't have a Windows computer here, but I'm fairly certain this would work. The Files app lets me browse assuming I have file sharing turned on my Mac, I can hop over and grab stuff off of the Mac using file sharing via the Files app. And I believe the same thing applies to Windows. If you have file sharing turned on with Windows, you should be able to access everything through the Files app. I know there are plenty of third-party apps that will let you browse a Windows machine, like FE File Explorer will let you do that, and there's one called File Browser. So you could do it that way. And just through a network connection, and then there's an option in the Affinity apps to open or import a file from another computer. If you import it, it brings in the file and it creates a local copy that you can work with, and it leaves the network file alone. If you open it instead of importing it, if you open it, any changes you make on the iPad will save back to that original file on the other device.
Gotcha. Okay. Very cool. And as far as the individual apps, do you want to start with Designer, or where do you want to start?
Well, the two that I've used the most in the past day, based on my needs and what I've used, with the original apps, have been Designer and Publisher. We can start with Designer, I guess, because I feel like, at least based on the little bit I've used it, it's different. There are new features, but it's not, it's iterative.
Yeah.
The changes are.
I'm on the tech specs page, and they do list a ton of new features, like the ability to, AutoCAD, DWG, DXF, import, place, and edit, maintaining layer structure. That seems like could be a big deal for some people. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's one, it's not something I've ever used and don't expect I'll need anytime soon. But yeah, that's something that they've done a good job of, I think, with the other apps, is just making sure that they can import the different file types. It's like they're aware of what their users need, and they've seemed very responsive on their forums, as far as listening and taking note of what people are asking for. So yeah, that's great.
The user interface, is it right that my impression is that it is more friendly for those that haven't learned the complicated thing that was version 1?
I can't say that I have used it enough in the past day to know what all the differences are. Visually, opening the app, I see that it is different. But I haven't had enough time with it to see all of the differences and to know whether I was very comfortable. I've been using the first version of the app for so long that, I will say that switching over to the second version, or version 2, it's not been difficult for me.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's going to be easier for people that are coming fresh to it from, say, an Adobe app, I don't know.
Yeah.
That is something people say, the Affinity apps are too hard to learn. And they're not. I feel like that's really not true. I think it's like anything. If you have a complex, powerful app like Adobe, and you switch over to an equally complex, powerful app like the Affinity apps, there are going to be a lot of similarities. The tools that you see on the left are very similar, and that's fairly easy to adapt to. But there are definitely some changes, especially going to the iPad app, because it's a little bit different from the desktop app because they have to design for touch.
And it seems like they do more with touch-focused user interface with this version. There's this quick menu thing that you can customize what's in there, and
yeah, I get the sense. I'll know more after a couple more days. I do get the sense that they've improved what they've done with the first version of Designer. They have improved with the second one, but I've not used it enough to really say, okay, well, this is better, and this is better, and this is better. It's just a general impression based on a couple hours of adapting to it.
And these apps, if you are using the M1 iPad, especially like a 1 terabyte or above model, it will use virtual memory swap. So it will take advantage of that 16 gigabytes of RAM if you are someone that has all that extra RAM.
Yes, they specifically call that out on their website as a new feature that they take advantage of the swap. And I only have the 8 gigabyte of memory on mine.
Yeah.
But I even with that, it's coming up from 4 gigabytes on the 2018 iPad. And it seems, I've noticed it with other apps like Safari, just the reloading of stuff never happens. I can go back and forth between apps, and there's a huge improvement in the way memory is managed. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how well Affinity has taken advantage of that. It's nice to see that they made it a point, though, to do that.
Yeah. And something that I wanted to note is the apps still are full screen only. There is no responsive window design, which the only thing I hope one day they figure out is how to go bigger than full screen. So like when you're on an external display in Stage Manager, to make the window even bigger to take up the full, say 32-inch display. Currently it'll take up the majority of it, but the way full screen apps work in Stage Manager is it's not a full on external monitor kind of situation.
Right. Yeah, I haven't tried it. I'm not running the beta, so I haven't had a chance to use it with an external display to see what it's doing there. But on the iPad, I am running Stage Manager, and I'll tell you, it is nice to be able to open up Affinity Publisher and have the Files app next to it, and have it scaled down just a little bit and have files next to it.
Yeah, and you could have all 3 Affinity apps open at the same time in Stage Manager. The apps will be in the background, but it makes it easy to go between them.
Right.
I wouldn't try to mess with the same. I'd love to play with this. I'd love to have the same file open in all 3 and see if they're auto updating across all 3.
Right. Probably, the way the sense of it seems to be that when you're working with a file, you have to I don't think it does an autosave.
Oh, okay.
So you have to, if I'm using a Publisher and I've got a document open, it doesn't autosave. There's an option to save it in there's an icon at the top left there that has certain commands, and save is one of those. And then I close it, and if I then check in files, it has been saved according to the time. And then you can also save it from that. So it gives you the opening screen in these apps gives you a display of your recent documents that are sort of meant to be open tabs. But it is important actually to remember to save your stuff because it doesn't autosave. There might be a background autosave that I haven't noticed yet. But yeah, so it seems to play pretty well with Stage Manager, letting you resize the document and work with other windows. So that's been really nice because, and actually, come to think of it, the version 1 apps also played pretty well with Stage Manager.
They do because of how Apple implemented full screen apps in Stage Manager. So in Stage Manager, even the settings app, which as notoriously doesn't move and window size, they do some display scaling tricks to actually make that happen, which I'm a fan.
And it seems a little, because it does seem like the app display is scaled down a little bit. If you don't, however much you shrink the window, it does seem to get smaller. And that's actually one thing I've noticed that I would call a bug, but I don't know that it's something that they can change because it's an Apple thing. Is that when you've got your toolbar in Publisher, when you've got a tool that's selected, it gives you a toolbar across the top that's reflective of whatever tool you've got selected. And the three widgets, the 3 dots for the window, are right in the way of that toolbar. They sit over the top of buttons, and they keep you from using the buttons. So it's tricky. It actually really it removes a button. You can't select underneath the except, and I will say this is something for maybe people to keep in mind when they're using an app like, especially the Affinity apps. I find I keep display scaling turned on to keep everything smaller.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. I really think.
Yeah, but I will say that it makes the Affinity apps certain aspects become a little bit difficult to tap on.
That is a curious thing. Like in some situations, you might want to turn like the bigger mode on if you just want to like work at Affinity and have bigger icons, right?
Yeah, I tried this morning. In fact, I thought I was having difficulty with some of the buttons in the. I was looking at the layers, studio on the right hand side. They call them studios. The tool sets are on the left, and on the right side, those are called studios. And I had selected the layer studio, and I was having a difficult time tapping with my finger. So I was using the pencil. I thought, well, I'm going to switch it over to the larger display. And it only takes a second. The iPad does this sort of respring. It's not a full restart. But boy, it is so much easier to use the app in that larger interface. Much better.
Yeah, because the app really does, in that smaller interface, it is more of a desktop experience, right?
Yeah.
And as far as the desktop app, have you looked over what's in the Mac version that didn't make it to the iPad for Designer 2 and anything that you wish made it over to iPad?
No, I actually haven't even downloaded the Mac versions yet. So I don't have a clue. Other than reading through the website, I did take note of a couple of things that were really minor, where it specified desktop only. Nothing that I saw made me really, nothing really bummed me out. So
okay. And anything else to note about Designer before moving on?
The one thing I would call attention to, just in terms of the what they themselves have highlighted as a big new feature, and I tried it, and I have to say it's pretty nice, is the mesh tool. It's going to be really handy. It's like a warping mesh tool for Designer that lets you do different kinds of warping. So there's you can take a flat square with some text on it and warp it into what looks like a nice perspective of something that going off into the distance, that sort of change. And that was previously not possible with Designer. So I think that's going to come in pretty handy.
Nice. Yeah. And can you go over again, like what you use Designer mainly, or what's one of the things you use as well as Publisher? What kind of things are you creating within it?
With Designer, I mostly am using it for, posters, single page items typically. Mm-hmm. So posters, flyers, postcards, anything like that a business card, maybe, a logo, anything that can be done just on a single page. Or it's also nice if you've got to do different versions, you can do artboards. So it's very handy creating a document with maybe 5 or 6 or 7 artboards for different versions of a document. So a lot of times I might start with a single artboard and get it to a certain point, and then it's very easy to just duplicate the artboard and then make changes to the second, and then duplicate again and make a third variation. So kind of a nice time saver. But yeah, so typically just single page documents is what I use Designer for. And things that require you can use photos and textures based on JPEGs or any kind of bitmap image will work fine in Designer. So that's kind of, once that came out, I kind of stopped using the photo app because I don't do a lot of photo editing. I think that's the strong suit of the photo app. So I mostly just do all that in Designer, and because it will easily work with bitmap images, it's covered everything.
What's the easiest way to get rid of like a background in a photo within? Could you do this in Designer? Like you'll start out with iOS's magical background removal, but there's some cruft around the edges that you want to just clean up. Is that something?
Yeah. There's a persona. If you're in Designer, you can open up a pixel persona, and I think that's what it's called. But basically, it lets you work with a bitmapped image, a photograph, and it's got an eraser tool. So yeah, that new feature of them on iOS to grab a subject and pull it over is so nice. It does such a great job. It's going to be a huge time saver. But yeah, if you need to clean it up, you can just in Designer, you just switch over to that different mode, that different persona, and the pixel persona, and then you're basically interacting with that photo like you would in the photo app, and you can use an eraser tool. There are different tools that they have for working with backgrounds or just getting in, zoom. One of the super nice things about the iPad on these apps is the ability to just quickly zoom in to the high level magnification. It's so fast to be able to do that, and then use an eraser tool to get to the small edges of things.
Nice, yeah. And anything from? Did you use InDesign in a previous world?
Yes, yeah. Before I switched over to Affinity Publisher, I used InDesign.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I meant the other one.
Illustrator.
Illustrator. I always forget that one. Anything from Illustrator that you wish would make it over one day?
For me, I would say the one thing that was missing with the previous version and I think is also still missing from the new version is the ability to do tracing. Unfortunately, that is not there. So taking an object and turning it from a photo into, when you trace something in Illustrator, it basically turns it into a vector object with, different vector components. And there are times when that comes in really handy. And that unfortunately was not added to the new version.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to Publisher.
Okay.
So, this is exciting. This is very exciting. So, the original app came out, 2 years ago? Is that about right?
Yeah, 2 to 3. Yeah, maybe 2, let's say.
Yeah. And it's for page layout. And can you kind of walk me through how you do page layout with Publisher? Like, what are the tool sets that this gives you? Like, is it giving you like boxes to put content into, or like what's kind of the process for creating these layouts?
Yeah, it's really nice. It is really nice, especially on the iPad, because again, the ability to move around a document with your fingers on the screen, scrolling through different pages, or magnifying in, zooming in, or zooming back out. With a Mac, you've got to use a mouse or a trackpad, and you're tapping, clicking to zoom in, zoom out, or you could use the keyboard shortcut again to zoom in or zoom out. But with the fingers on the iPad, the ability to just it's so nice. But anyway, you start out with the size of the dimensions that you need to create a document, and you can lay it out. They've got some nice tools built in to help you lay things out. Of course, you've got your sort of typical things like margins, and you can set bleed and all of that. And then they've got different tools that help you sort of determine grids.
These master
columns.
pages, is that kind of the...
Yeah, you can do master pages, which will allow you to set up, for example, like a page numbers or footers, and you can place objects in that you can fill later. So if you're going to be creating, maybe you've got somebody that needs a newsletter and you want to create a template, a design that is going to serve as sort of a template, then you can just lay out your objects. I don't tend to work that way. Usually I'll lay out a newsletter for somebody, and especially if it's the first time I'm working with somebody, I'll lay it out using the actual, they send me content. They might be sending me text and photos for the first page and logos or whatever. And I'll lay it out using boxes. Sometimes one thing I've gotten in the habit of doing is, instead of just putting an image in, I might start with an image, but then you can convert that over to a photo, basically a photo box, a photo frame. And then later on, when you reuse that document in the future, or if you save it as a template, it's fairly easy, if you've turned your photos into photo frames, to then change out pictures in the future. You just drag and drop, and it'll go right into the box, and you can resize the photo within the frame as needed, or resize the whole thing.
So you add to the document like a placeholder thing that's just like a photo placeholder, and there's text placeholder. Like what kind of content placeholders exist in the app?
Yeah, there's text boxes that can be. You can pop in say you want to do multi-columns. You might do a single text box that you stretch across a page, and then you can say, well, I want this text box to be 4 columns, and so there's a tool to say, well, divide this single text box into 4 even columns, or you can do different. If you've got a page that's maybe more complicated with different elements, you might do a text box and then do a separate text box in whatever size you need, and then yet another text box, and then link those. It's very simple to link a text frame to another text frame to another text frame on a page or to another page or what have you.
Okay, so if you like have a bunch of text, say you're like writing a magazine. You have the article written by the author. You can paste that whole thing in, and if it doesn't fit, it'll continue just through the links.
Yes, it'll flow right through to the end of the boxes you have. And if you don't have enough room, you get to the end of, maybe there's more text that you can then add another box and continue linking.
Very cool.
But
this is a tool that magazines would use. Is that accurate?
Oh, absolutely. You could use this. I had a client several years back that I used. We did a newspaper. You can use this for newspapers, magazines, any books. Any kind of It's exactly what it's for. Is multi-page layout, and they've really made it easy to insert to place a text document, and it flows through all the whole document. Whatever you have linked and preset. It will flow through it. And the same thing for pictures. If you've got a page that is, say, 5 pictures, maybe you're doing a catalog and you've got 10 pictures, you can create the text frames beforehand, or the photo frames, the image frames beforehand, and then there's a tool on the left for placing, and you can then go in your Files app or the Photos app and choose 10 pictures, and then it'll prompt you to select the images, and then you go back and just tap through the different frames you have, and with each tap it does a new photo based on, I think it's the order that you chose them, and it inserts them sequentially one after the other. So really quick and very nice for the sorts of things you would expect for an app like this, of course. It's not necessarily that they're doing anything special, but they're doing what you expect, and it works very well so far.
And I think this is in a class of its own on iPad. Am I right? Is there something similar to this on iPad?
No, nothing at all. The only other thing that I have used that does any kind of page layout is the Apple Pages app.
Right.
And it's actually
that's a much more simple experience, obviously.
Yeah, it's gotten really, Pages has got really, they've really brought it up to par with the Mac app, and it's very powerful. It does quite a bit. It's missing certain features, like you can't do bleeds. You can't do a proper bleed with Pages. You can work around that missing thing, but it's not set up. You can't do printer's marks. The sort of things that you expect to do with an app like this, you can't do in Pages. So it works great. I find that if I've got a client that wants to be able to edit an app, and they're used to using something like Pages, then it's a great time to switch, to use Pages. But for more advanced stuff, definitely Publishers is the way to go. And no, there's nothing else.
Yeah, it's amazing. Adobe hasn't done much here. They do a lot for photographers with Photoshop Mobile, which I hear is pretty good, and Lightroom, of course. But as far as like designer and publisher, those kind of things haven't even been attempted by Adobe yet.
No, they've just got the Photoshop and Illustrator app. I think they do have another. They have a
very simplistic like layout stuff that's just different kind of market.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they have a video app, but no, they have nothing like an InDesign from Adobe.
Yeah, and something that I do hope makes it to iPad one day is this book creation and management tool that's only in the desktop version of Publisher 2. And this, you can make books on the iPad, but it all has to live in one file. With the desktop version, you can pull together multiple Publisher files. Each file is a unique chapter for that book, and it lets you kind of manage the table of contents and indexes, and it seems like a very, very well smart out way of creating a multi-chapter book, which is something I probably don't have an immediate need of, but it kind of reminds me of maybe this would be a replacement for iBooks Author,
Right. Yeah, that is one of the features that's still missing on the iPad, and I could see for a particular market where that would be really useful. And in that case, that's the sort of situation where you could probably do a lot of the work on the iPad and then open it up on the Mac to take it to the next level of actually adding that.
Yeah, because basically it's pulling together these multiple files. So you can create all the individual files on your iPad, and for the publishing aspect of let's get these chapters all lined up properly, you just do that final step at the Mac for the moment.
Exactly. Yep. And I'll say one of the things I was wondering how they would do when it comes to linking to outside documents or say images, I wondered about how they were going to manage that with the iPad. It seemed to me, my own lack of imagination and technical knowledge, I wondered how well that would work. And I'm happy to say that, if you open up a Publisher file and you can set it as a default that it prefers linked items, which I find that with the stuff I do, that's usually best, because if you've got a lot of images in a document's going to become pretty large in file size and a bit unwieldy. And it's really nice.
Would that also let you edit the linked file, say, in a photo editing app, and then it'll just automatically update?
Well, yeah, but you don't necessarily need to do that. That's where the magic of hopping over to so I have a file with 5 or 6 or 10 different photos, and maybe I want to go in and tweak them a little bit. And they're linked files, they're linked photos. I can actually go into the photo persona,
right,
and make the changes there, and then hop back into the primary publisher persona. And I believe it only saves those adjustments to what is on, into the local copy.
Yeah.
If you go into the Files app and look at the original document, the original photo, it doesn't appear to have been saved or changed by doing it that way.
Okay.
Which is fine. That's fine and dandy. As long as it lets me make the changes in the document and lets me, export that, then there's no issue there.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, having the ability to do linked documents is going to be very nice.
For sure.
Or linked photos.
Yeah. And custom tables, I'm noticing, are a thing.
Yeah. That's very nice too. I've got a newsletter that I do that requires tables, and the table tool in Publisher is pretty good. I haven't tried out the new version on the iPad yet to see if they made any changes, but on the Mac, using the tables has been pretty good.
Good, yeah. So anything else on Publisher? Like this is, there's a lot in this app, but I need to spend more time to. I think you can. Yeah, we can only really scratch the surface because there's so much to an app like this that just providing an overview is probably enough to, I will say that it is almost on feature parity with the Mac version. From what I can tell, seems like there are only a few things that were left out. And I will say that, when you're using the iPad version, it doesn't feel like you're using something that is just partially there. It's the full thing. And the only real difference is that the interface is optimized for touch. And again, just to point out that it is better probably to at least try it in the larger view instead of the zoomed view. Yeah.
I think that's something to consider when you use it. And I'm noticing a few bugs but they're pretty good about getting things worked out. There are some issues with fonts. I'm finding that you can import fonts to the Affinity Apps directly, so you don't need like a third-party utility. There are third-party utilities that you can add fonts that will be available in all the apps on an iPad, or you can use the Affinity tool for importing fonts. and they'll only be available to the Affinity apps. But if you import a font into Publisher, it will be available to Photo and Designer as well. But I'm finding some bugs with the font so far, and hopefully they'll get those fixed soon. I'm sure there'll be some growing pains.
Yeah, and is that through the add-ons ability within the account, or is that separate?
The fonts you do through the preferences.
Okay.
And the add-ons like brushes and some stuff, I think you do that through when you open it up, you can go over to the store. There's an option to kind of click through to the store. I forget now where that is. Oh, and there's also a really nice built-in photo stock app. It taps into Pixel Bay? I think there are two options, sort of free stock photos that you can tap into, and really nice for, say, doing newsletters in the Publisher app. To do it's built in. You tap over and you can pull the images over that you need.
Excellent. Yeah. And as far as the final output, this is page layout. If you're making a magazine or newspaper, it sends these files off in appropriate formats, and you just kind of have to find the right printer to do this work for you.
Yeah, I typically send everything off as PDF.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it doesn't let you export InDesign, which would be nice. Hopefully, they'll add that at some point to be able to export an InDesign IDML file. It does let you import InDesign IDML files.
Okay.
And it does a really good job. The Mac version, and I assume the iPad version, does a great job of importing PDFs and turning those into really nice starting point. So if you've got a client that has an old newsletter, for example, they send you a PDF, you can import that into, assuming it's not a flattened PDF, of course, you can import it into Publisher and get going with certain things will be a bit odd, where it's combined different elements, maybe with drop shadows or something. So you might need to do a little bit of work, but it does a great job of importing PDFs.
Excellent. And what's the situation of all the designer, Adobe Designer, like templated? I know you can purchase these book covers that you can modify and stuff. I wasn't sure if that situation's any better these days.
I don't know. I haven't done any of that.
Okay.
I assume if you can purchase something that comes in a format, either say the InDesign IDML file can be imported. If it's in a PSD file or something, the Affinity apps do a great job of importing many of the Adobe app file formats, but I haven't done any of that specifically.
Okay, cool. And then finally, the Photos app. This is the one I'm going to be diving a lot into as I'm diving more and more into photography, as people have heard on the podcast.
Right, yep.
And this is one of the only tools, both the original and this one, that allows you to do HDR and focus stacking. So if you take a series of photos, like on a tripod, different exposure or focuses, you can stack those, and it does this really great merging of those, where it'll actually, even if you're not on a tripod, kind of crop out, it'll do a smart crop thing where it combines everything appropriately and makes these stunning photos out of them, which is really great.
Right. Nice. Yeah. I haven't used it. I'm not likely to use many of those advanced features myself. I'm sure you'll learn all that more than I have.
Yeah, but all I can say is the user interface seems much more pleasant to work with, and it is something that I do need more time to dig into. It does. This new version works much better with RAW, is my understanding, for non-destructive editing there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they have a whole different RAW mode, I think.
Yeah, they do. And
lets you bounce back and forth between, you can do RAW edits and then go back in and make other changes and then return to the RAW edits, which I guess previously that wasn't possible. They've got, I think they call it linked or embedded, the different
Yeah, you can basically
modes.
Develop these RAW files, and then once you develop it, you can then work on top of that. But if you want to go back, you can just let's redevelop this and change some of the exposures or whatever you want to change there. Which is really, really, really nice.
Yeah, actually something to suggest for all these apps, now that I'm thinking about it, is if you need to use the built-in help system, they have a really nice built-in help system, but it is really difficult, especially in that zoom in the smaller mode on the iPad Pro. It makes reading it really difficult. So again, if you want to use the built-in help system, you want to probably switch to the larger non-zoomed or more space, less space. Just be willing to change that. And I bring it up because I think that they have a lot of the tutorials are online, so you might be able to find it there. I don't know if they have like a complete user manual duplication online. I know that they have YouTube videos, amazing YouTube tutorials.
Those are great, and they're out for version 2. And I would encourage everyone to watch through them to give you just a foundation level of understanding of these different apps, because they're really well done. They're long enough, but not like 5 hours long. You could probably watch all of one of the apps within an hour. There's probably 5 or 6 currently for each app.
Right. Yeah. In fact, they cover, the reason I thought of it was because I only watched one, but it was the one that was on Photos app, and he was talking about the different RAW development modes.
Yeah, that is the one I actually watched as well. Because and one thing I kind of was trying to find where it was in version 2 was the stacking. And something I noticed in the video is when you're creating a new document, you can tap and hold, and that's where some of the stuff is hidden away. If the new icon has a little triangle in the corner, that means there's something that can be tapped and hold to dive into more options there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where it was those kinds of things where I was finding it difficult with my finger in that smaller view to tap on. I don't know, did you have any difficulty tapping into some of that?
I didn't, but I should say I didn't, but I mainly use the trackpad. So there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, they have specific iPad tutorials. So for photo, there's exporting, command controller, and the command controller is really cool. This is like, imagine the Surface knob thing as a touch thing that you can pull up, and that seems something that I need to dive more into. But it seems like a really good use of touch and
you're talking about the small circle that you can use that allows you to choose Shift and Command, the different shortcuts.
Yep.
Yeah. I played with that this morning because, like I said, I've been using it as a tablet without the keyboard, and yes, that really is nice to activate that. And say you're wanting to select multiple objects, you can activate that and hit the Shift, and then it acts as though you're holding down your Shift key. Or maybe you're selecting a bunch of text and you want to do non-continuous text selection. So you would hit the command, and it kind of just like you would expect if you're holding down the command key, you can then select different bits of text. Very nice.
Yeah. No, it's great. And so dive into the YouTube videos. There are the manuals that you can kind of read through as well, but I find video is a much better way to learn these apps.
Yeah.
And just start with a goal in like, how do I do this? And you kind of learn it that way as well, of having a project and trying to figure out what's needed to do that.
They have done such an amazing job with the documentation and the user guide, whether it's the built-in or the YouTube. I don't know what's on the website. I started looking this morning on the website to see what they had. Just because I was curious if they make it available in something that's a text adjustable. I'm surprised. That would be one thing I wish they could add in that help section, because it is so thorough. There's surprisingly no setting to increase the font size. So anybody that has any difficulty with small text is going to struggle.
Yeah.
But the YouTube stuff that they've done is just amazing.
And then if you do purchase these apps, I'd encourage you to go to the website for the add-ons. There's a lot of free brushes you can just claim if you're an owner of version 2. So go on there and make sure you get all of the free stuff that you can to add to the apps.
Yeah, lots of really nice brushes and textures.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's stuff you can buy as well, but there are a lot of free ones to start with.
Yep. Yeah. And just a very powerful suite, and very exciting that this is all out on iPad. It was interesting for the M2 iPad introduction. We all saw as part of the what pro apps they're featuring for M2, and Affinity Publisher 2 was listed as one of those apps. And it was curious to me, Publisher 2, we don't have Publisher 1, so it makes perfect sense now why it is 2 versus 1. It's like everything's on version 2, so that's why.
Yeah. All the people that if you follow the Affinity forums, there have been just a whole bunch of people just chomping at the bit to get Publisher for the iPad. So as little leaks were happening, screenshots and stuff, before they made it official, people noted screenshots with Publisher, and so there's been a lot of excitement to have it released. But yeah, it's super nice, especially with all of the sort of that narrative that there are not enough pro apps on the iPad, and now we have yet one more that is there that it does the job.
Yeah, I really want a project to sink my teeth into, photo books that I can do more with than just the simple photo book apps out there. I'm not sure. Yeah, I gotta explore.
Yeah, I just had a big project I used Publisher for on the Mac, and I was thinking, I wish I'd come a week later. I would have enjoyed doing it on the iPad. But actually, it's nice. One way to learn is just actually they have lots of, for learning. You can also, they have lots of samples to note. You can just grab some of their samples and play with them. If you're new to a particular app, or if you just want to explore, the samples are a great starting point for learning. But yeah, I'm looking.
Yeah, I would think it'd be a fun, if you're just wanting to learn too, it would be kind of fun to just for your own personal use forever, just take a website you love, like maybe Daring Fireball, make a little magazine out of the week's worth of posts, add images and stuff, and make it just transform that text and kind of play around with
Sure.
that.
It's
a way
practice.
To learn,
Yeah, absolutely. Be a great way to practice. Yep.
Well, anything else before we wrap it up?
I feel like we've covered a nice overview.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a good starting point.
Denny, where can people find what you're up to online?
I have a website, beardyguycreative.com is where I do my sort of my services type stuff. And then I have a less professional freeform blog at beardystarstuff.net. And I'm also on Mastodon, and I've got links to Mastodon from both of those.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was an exciting week when we had this drop, and I wanted to chat with someone as soon as I could. And I remembered back from when we chatted last about it. I know you're very much into these apps, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been a blast talking to you.
Well, that's my interview with Denny, all about Affinity version 2.0. Make sure to check out his stuff over at beardyguycreative.com. And you can support this podcast over at patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. With that, I'll talk to everyone again real soon.